Okay, so that was fun. We did a little CSS, did a little HTML, just got our toes wet in that. What we're going to do now is some JavaScript. So, and to do that, we're going to need to do that in HTML as well. So let's start the lecture here. We will do the screen share. There we go. Okay, we're just going to share that whole screen. Boom, JavaScript 1. Okay. Let's do the slideshow. All right, so some things about JavaScript to get started. First of all, common misconception. It is not a close cousin in any way to Java. They don't have any real relation. What happened, JavaScript came out shortly after Java became popular. And it was originally called LiveScript, as I recall, around the mid-90s. And they thought, for marketing purposes, let's call it JavaScript, right? There's not a close association with Java, but it was basically a marketing tool. There were other scripting languages competing to be the king of the scripting world, but they said, yeah, it'll be a good marketing thing. And there's some weirdness in there. You might think that the good people at Java would be upset that somebody was piggybacking off them, but life is funny. Life is funny. Like, you can have a cereal like grape nuts, right? You've heard of grape nuts. Probably your grandparents have eaten it. There's no grapes in there. There's no nuts in there. How can they call it grape nuts? Well, the original logic was it used grape sugar and it had sort of a nutty flavor. And yeah, doesn't have to make a whole lot of sense, okay? The point is, there's not a close association between Java and JavaScript. However, as I've said before, if you've taken my Java course, JavaScript is going to be so much easier. You're going to say, oh man, this is easy. I can do this, even if you struggled with Java. And if you didn't struggle with Java, then you're still going to think JavaScript's easy. Okay. The truth is, JavaScript has a somewhat similar appearance to Java, right? So one of the things is, like, statements end with semicolons. That's a thing, okay? And it's generally case sensitive, so that's a thing. It has a few things that aren't strictly identical with Java, but it kind of looks like Java. That's the justification. So, typical usage within HTML. You give some HTML an ID attribute, okay? Then you write a script that specifies when and how the element changes. For example, new text, new images, or some kind of action. And then you associate the script with the element and event. All right, so let's do a quick example. Okay, so we have our old page here. Not this one. We have this page. Okay. Doug's super awesome HTML page. Yeah. We'll change that back to page 1 in a moment. Okay. So let's put in a little JavaScript. Okay. So over here, we can do an on-click attribute. Now let's do, yeah, fine. Let's do this. Do very simple. On-click equals, well, let's give it an ID attribute. ID equals para, okay? And then over here, we'll do on-click equals, and then here's where we're going to put our JavaScript instruction, right here in this on-click stuff. So we'll do document.get element by ID, okay, para dot inner HTML equals updated text. Oops. Okay. Now, what do we have going on here? Let's make sure that this all works, because I didn't like tape something, make some little syntax error. Let's see. There we go. Easy. See what happened there? I clicked on the heading and the text updated. For those of you who missed it, because it happened super fast, let's just change that to page 1 because that's a bit silly. Okay, we'll do it again. Here I'm hovering over the header, I'm not doing anything, I'm gonna click, boom, updated text. Okay, so let's walk through the simple mechanics of that. Back to web design here, so it's all on the HTML page. Okay, blow that up and I'm gonna push this screen down there. Okay, so in my header tag, I set this. I have an on-click attribute, and I say, when I click this, I want something to happen, right? So when I have the on-click attribute for the H1 header, that means when I click on it, I can choose something to happen, okay? So all that goes inside these double quotes, right? That's the on-click attribute there. Now, the basic syntax here, I say document dot. So remember, we have the standard dot notation. If you're used to it in Java, what it basically means is all this stuff on the right belongs to this thing on the left. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying within this document, search through this document, find the element whose ID attribute is para, right, which is down here. This one is para, and set its inner HTML, right? Well, in the case of a paragraph, the inner HTML, the stuff that's inside the paragraph tags, that's just going to be some text. So I change its inner HTML to updated text. Okay. Now, syntactic thing with Java, or JavaScript rather, you want to use single quotes. JavaScript can use single quotes or double quotes pretty much interchangeably, but where it becomes a problem, HTML integrating with JavaScript. So HTML is always going to use double quotes. And if I put in single quotes here, then HTML looks, okay, here's the first double quote, I scan through, I don't find one, here's the double quote at the end. Hey, that's where this whole on-click attribute ends. Great, I understand that. If I use double quotes in here, right, then the HTML is going to be all messed up. It's going to think that the on-click attribute is that. And that is not a syntactically valid statement, right? So here's the first quote, here's the second quote. Everything after this is just going to be some weird text garbage, okay? It's not going to work. So again, when you're putting JavaScript together with HTML, what you want to remember is this: single quotes for JavaScript, double quotes for the HTML code. Okay, so we got a chat thing here. What's happening? I have the same code. This is a heading. This is a paragraph. Yeah, that's what it'll show if you have all that. But did you click on the header? You got to click on the header. Okay. So that's what we got. Okay, good. So that's our quick intro to this stuff. Now, this all works with the same kind of tags. For example, if I want to make a button tag instead of an H1 tag, right, I could do a button. Let's make a button. Okay. So the button is going to be one of those simple, you know, HTML buttons. And the button text, I can do something like, click me. Okay, that's going to be the text there. Okay, so I can save this, go back to my folder, and now instead of a header tag, I'll have a button tag. So let's go. Try to move this. I could grab that. There we go. There, wonderful. Okay, open this again, page 1. Now I have a button tag. Oh, didn't like that. Let me say I did something a little screwy there. All right, let's see. I have this here. Button. Oh, duh. Okay. Yeah, that's what I need. So save that. Boom. It's easy to make these tiny mistakes. Okay, so there's my button, says click me. When I click on it, boom, same thing happens. Okay, very simple JavaScript stuff. So let's go on and talk a little bit more about it then. So this is what we say. So typical usage within HTML, we find some element, we give it an ID attribute. That's what we did with our paragraph tag. Then we write a script specifying how it changes. Well, That's actually what this is. Even though it doesn't look like much of a script, this code here, right, this is a JavaScript statement. Okay, and that's what we're doing here. So we're saying if somebody clicks on this button, we execute this single JavaScript statement. Okay, that's it. So we have our thing that's going to change, and we have the condition that makes it change. Well, there you go. There's your script. All right. Back to slides then. Okay. Now, yeah, JavaScript can be used with other document styles. For example, if for some reason you're using an an XML document, which is pretty much obsolete, but it still exists, yeah, you could do it with that. But, you know, HTML is obviously the vast majority of where JavaScript is used. So, basics. Key similarities between Java or C or C++, if you have experience with those. Number one, statements end in semicolons, right? If you have a block of statements like we see inside the squiggly brackets eventually, then the squiggly brackets don't require the semicolons. We'll see more of that in a bit. Number two, it is case sensitive. HTML is generally not case sensitive, you know, except for example, for the text you actually show. But your HTML keywords in the tags, those aren't. But in JavaScript, they are, so you have to be aware of that. Double slash for comments. So again, if you've seen this in Java, that'll be very familiar. So if you want to put some comments describing what your script is doing, yeah, you can do that. But it's very rarely done once you actually put JavaScript on a web page, because that's just extra data that's not helping anybody. If you're building like some kind of code repository, sure, you put the comments in there, but when you actually put the JavaScript on a page, then you cut all that stuff out. Uses all the standard math symbols, right? So addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and typically uses an equal symbol for assigning values. So all that, like I said, it's going to feel like Java, but there are some key differences. So number one, variables are untyped, okay? If you remember from Java, you'll know that everything is typed, right? You have your 8 primitive types, so 6 of them being plain numbers. You have a char, which is a text character that acts like a number. It is a number, or it displays as a text character. And you have a Boolean for true or false, right? So, and every object type you have in Java is its own type. But in JavaScript, the variables are untyped, right? So yeah, everything is just a var, and the situation is going to determine what its actual data type is. And text can use double or single quotes. Again, if you remember from Java, a double quote means it's going to be a string, and a single quote means it's going to be this character type. So some of that's going to be different. The net result, JavaScript is a lot easier to just slap something together. But the downside is it's a little bit less efficient, or maybe a lot less efficient in how it runs. And so what it is, if you have a program that's on a web page running through JavaScript, it's not going to be some heavy duty, cutting edge graphics quality game. It's going to tend to be something fairly simple, like Angry Birds or Candy Crush or something like that. It's going to be fairly simple. And therefore, it doesn't have to be super efficient, right? The computers are pretty fast, even though there's a little bit of an extra delay because of processing this typing issue. It doesn't matter because the application is pretty cheesy compared to the capabilities of the machine. Okay, let's see. We have some chat stuff here. So theoretically, you can replace all with. I'm not sure. I have the same code. Yeah, sorry, that question didn't fill out. We'll talk about it in a little bit, though. Oh, all double quotes with single quotes. Yes, you could, right? But it could create confusion. So again, the rule is always going to be, if you have HTML, use double quotes for your HTML, use single quotes for your JavaScript. Okay, that way you'll never run into that problem. It is probably the single most common mistake I see. So people will say, oh, my JavaScript isn't working, what's up? And yeah, they use like double quotes throughout everything, and the HTML gets confused. Okay. Yes, good. Thank you. Okay. JavaScript, variables. So we talked about variables, they're untyped. So to use a variable in JavaScript, you first have to declare it. What we mean by declaring it is giving it a name, so that when your browser is reading all that JavaScript code and it sees the name of the variable, it knows it's a variable and not some other command or some other bit of text or something. So to declare it, two things. You give it a name and you state that it's a variable using the magic word var. Okay, so some people say var, I say var, I don't know, var for variable, whatever. Okay, so example, statement var x will let you use x as a JavaScript variable. Okay, so basic syntax, var equals expression, where var is the variable name and expression is text or some expression that can be resolved to a number. For example, x equals 2, or x equals x plus 3.2, or x equals, this is actually a string, 5.2, but when necessary, Java will even convert that to a number because that's the way vars work. So let's go ahead, let's put this stuff in our web page. Let's have a little fun with variables, but only a little fun, not too much. Don't want to have too much fun this early. Okay, going into Notepad, let's do this. We're going to make a script. Okay, so when you put the JavaScript stuff in separately, you need a script tag. So here we go, script. We're going to close that script out. Okay, so there we have our script tag. And in here we can just, you know, write JavaScript like life is good. Okay, so let's do var x equals 1. Okay, easy. And let's do this. We're going to try this. Let's see how that works. So what we're going to do, initially x is 1. When we load the page, that's just going to be the state of this. X will be 1. That's going to run right away when we load the page. Okay. Then this page is going to be sitting there. It's going to be waiting for us to do something. So if we change this, do this on click, let's do this. X equals x plus 1. And then we're going to set this inner document equals x. How that goes. All right, let's save this. Let's run it. Okay, so it says there. Oh my goodness, x is 1, we added 1 to it. And every time I click on it, it keeps going up. What is happening? JavaScript is happening. It's like magic. How many clicks is enough? 61, that is enough. Okay, so do a quick walkthrough there, see what happened. Okay, you go down there. So what we did here, number one, we set up a script block. So remember, this script is going to run as soon as we load the page, right? Our browser grabs the page and it's going to scan through all this stuff, construct the page. And one of the things it does, it'll run the script. So a script is going to be some active code on the page. It's going to run right away as soon as the browser is displaying the page. So it's set this var x equals 1. So throughout the document, when we appropriately refer to x, our browser is going to know, oh, you mean that variable x that you put down here. Okay. Then our command, we set up 2 statements in our on click, right? Separated by semicolons. So our first statement was x equals x plus 1. We're going to increment x. Then same thing, document.getElementById para, that's our paragraph tag down there. We're going to set its inner HTML to display the value of our var x. Okay, and then every time we click on it, x is going to increase by 1, and we're going to force this update to our paragraph tag. That's how come it does what it does. All right, so once again, resets, Okay, that's what happens. Okay. Okay, very good. Questions on this? Does this all make sense? I hope we're good. Any questions, any stuff? Okay, well, let's go ahead. Let's proceed. Do a little more JavaScript 1. Okay, so that's our basic syntax for variables and how they work. Oh, we do have a chat. What's happening? Oh, good. Wonderful. All right. Okay, next thing. So again, if you remember from Java, you remember the concept of objects, you remember the concept of arrays, I hope. So an object is a computer representation of something. And in Java, you have data and methods, right? So every object can have some data, every object can have some methods, stuff that it does. Well, the same is true in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, you declare it a little differently, but you set attributes. For example, in this var my name, since it's encased in squiggly brackets, JavaScript rather is going to recognize, oh, that's an object. And it has these two attributes. It has a first attribute and a last attribute, right? So the syntax is attribute name, colon, and then the value. So in this case, it's a string that's Doug, right? A string is just a slug of text. And then last, this attribute is going to be another slug of text, right? Lundquist. So that's me. So this my name object has a first and last name. Arrays are special kinds of objects that contain one or more of the same thing. Now, this same thing could be anything. Could be a set of numbers of the same kind, could be a set of text, right? Could be a set of strings of the same time, could be other objects, could even be arrays of arrays, right? So for example, if I want to create an array called all names, this would be like a list of names. I could have a couple names in there. One of them could be my name, one of them could be your name, right? And then if, for example, I had created var my name with some attributes and var your name with some attributes, then I could reference them within an array. Now, the nice thing about arrays, again, if you remember from Java, is that you can reference the elements of an array by number without having to code in specifically what they are, right? So let's go over to Paint, and I'll briefly describe why this is a wonderful thing. Okay, imagine if you run some query and get a list of results, right? So for example, like a list of products matching some search criteria on a web page. Okay, you want to see some stuff. Now, what you'd like as a web designer is for each of those search results to automatically link to their product pages, right? So when you click on one, it takes you to the correct page. Well, with an array, that's very easy to do, right? You specify, you gather the results, build them into the array, right? So you would have something like var products equals, and then we put this here and we do something like, you know, P1, P2, P3, you know, dot, 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 whatever those things are, right? And each one of those, let me see. Sorry, I'm just referencing. Those are actually strings, that's fine. Each one of those becomes the element that's displayed on the page, right? And then instead of referring to them specifically by name, I can refer to them through the products reference. So I could say, you know, basically, I'm going to put some pseudocode here. If you click on the first element of the array, that's products 0, right? The second is products 1, and so on. Okay, so you don't need to specifically say in your page code, it has to be P1, it has to be the object name P2, or so on. You can just say, well, whatever the object at thing 0 is, that's the one that I'm going to display. So for example, you might create a table for results. Let's put a space there. Create a table for results in HTML, right? The table is an HTML structure. Fill out the table with data from the products and set the ID tag on each table row to reference, let's see. Yeah, set the ID tag on each table row to match the product, so that when you click on an element in a row, you automatically go to the correct page, okay? And if that sounds a little weird or confusing or abstract, whatever, don't worry. We will actually do this in a week or two. Okay, we'll get there. We'll build up some of this stuff. It'll be kind of fun. So you'll be able to see why arrays are very nice. It solves a problem that otherwise would not be easily solvable. Okay. So that's objects and arrays. Next thing, functions. So functions in JavaScript allow specifying the instructions that get reused elsewhere. So for example, suppose you want to have a function that returns the larger of two numbers, right? For whatever reason, that's something you need to have on your web page, say. Well, you can write it up generically like this. So here we have this function max var1 var2. If var1 is greater than var2, return var1. So this function, it accepts two quantities, var1 and var2, and then it compares them, right? So if the first one is greater, returns it. Otherwise, it's going to return the other one. That's the simple logic there. But the point, this isn't specified for a particular value for var1 or var2. It's just whatever the two numbers are, you send them along, and that's what they'll be. Okay, so here, look at the line above. I have a var n1 and a var n2. Okay, and then I assign to var n3 the result of that function. So I call this max function, and I send along these two vars, n1 and n2. Well, when the function receives them, within its scope, it's going to just refer to them as var1 and var2. So this n1, when I run the function this time, this n1 gets sent along and converted to var1. This n2, its value gets assigned to var2 here. Okay, and this is an example where we say only the statements need semicolons, not the function headers, comparisons, these blocks in here. So again, this is a thing that's a little weird. It takes some time to get used to, but if you're doing an if statement, for example, this if, right, the if is followed often by a block. Well, a block doesn't need a semicolon to end. So even though you might think, well, this is a statement, there should be a semicolon at the end. Yeah, in JavaScript, there isn't. That's how that works. Okay. Events, this might be the last slide. Let me think. Oh yeah, I have a warning. Okay. So events, we talked about JavaScript. There's a whole bunch of things that can trigger the JavaScript to happen. So things like keyboard input, things like mouse actions, page loading, whatever. We have this full list if you're interested. Let's open up Firefox. Let's see what happens. Boom. So these are all of our DOM events, right? Document Object Model. These are all the different things that could trigger an action on an HTML page, right? So there's a long list of things. If we scroll down through here, we'll find, where's my onClick? Oh, it must be in the next list, yeah. These are properties. No, there's another one here. All right, well, anyway, there are a bunch of different things that can happen, right? So these are all the different events that happen, and right, these are properties, whatever. For example, this is the button that happened, or this occurs when the browser is trying to get media data but not available, so you have a stalled one. This is a touch end, fingers removed from a touch screen, or touch start when somebody touches a touch screen, right? There's some mouse ones, the mouse crosses over various element boundaries. So there's a whole bunch of different events that can happen. Proper to make these comparisons. Okay, we have a little thing here. Which comparisons are we talking about?
Sorry, I'll just unmute.
Yeah.
Is it okay to say that CSS is like the form, HTML is the function, and JavaScript would be the execution?
I could live with that. I mean, if you want to pick like one word for each of them, right? So I would say HTML is the content, CSS is the formatting, and JavaScript is, you know, dynamic, right? Because anything you're actually going to display on the page ultimately has to be displayed as HTML, right? Yes.
Yes. Could you repeat the word that you used for JavaScript? Thank you very much, by the way. I appreciate it.
Dynamic, right? The reason why you have JavaScript on a page is you want page elements to be able to change. So if you want to give you like the little bit of the history lesson here, and this I don't usually give at this time, but we can briefly discuss. So way back when, we'll go through the way back when, right? Wayback Machine. Way back when, say, circa 1990, web pages were static. That is, you loaded the content, and that's what it was. It didn't change. If you wanted an update, you needed to refresh the page. And in particular, you needed to refresh the entire page. Okay, it's a bit of a hassle. For example, if you were involved in an eBay auction circa 1996, right? There was a timer, and as the auction neared the end, others could snipe, right? Make a bid at the last second. And you wouldn't see it unless you refreshed. Okay, this was a problem. This aggravated people. So JavaScript, other techniques, things like Java applets, which are dead. I mean, they still exist, but nobody uses them. Or, you know, other plugins like Flash or Silverlight if you had Microsoft, or QuickTime, right, which is something that Apple used. Other plugins were used for dynamic content like video playing, games, stuff like that. And JavaScript, which is still widely used, right? Still widely used. All of those are various ways where you can do dynamic things on pages. Basically, change the page without reloading. It's a neat thing. Okay, so like even circa 1990, you could play video, right, through a web page. You could have some animated GIF that was just, you know, like some image flipping, but you'd have to load all the content for that, right? So you could have like a flashing banner image at the top of the page, but you'd have to load all the different states of the image, and it would just cycle through them somehow. But it wasn't dynamic in the sense that it didn't respond to user actions. It was just this component on the page is going to be graphical and do some stuff, but it does it on a predictable schedule. Okay, so that's what I say if we wanted to take all of this together, right? If you want one word for each, HTML is the page content, CSS is the formatting, and JavaScript is dynamic, let stuff change. If you wanted to use one word for each of those, which, you know, is obviously going to be something of a simplification. Okay, good. Well, let's return. Yes, that's the way it was. Well, we were glad to have it. You know, we were still pretty excited to have just internet in 1995. All right. So if you want to check some of this stuff, there's various links, W3 Schools. You can check this stuff out. Yeah. Okay. So before we proceed a little more, we'll do a couple slides on JavaScript too. But here's some big warnings about JavaScript. So number one, web browsers are typically entirely intolerant of JavaScript coding errors. If you have any JavaScript syntax error on the web page, it's probably going to invalidate all the JavaScript code on that page. And this is very different from HTML. In HTML, if you have a malformed tag, it's still going to display as many of the tags as it can within the document object model, right? So let's go back to Paint for a second. Let's see if I can recover this. Whoop. My tree. There we go. Suppose we have a malformed tag. Okay, whatever. In the header, I have something. I wanted to get to red here. There we go. There we go. We have some malformed tag, this red one, right? It's not what it's supposed to be. It's messed up. Well, the document object model can still display all of these tags. It's going to look at that and say, dude, you're messed up. I can't do anything with you. But all this other stuff, yeah, okay, I can still display all that. And it's going to. But JavaScript is different. If there's something wrong with the JavaScript won't work. So, for example, if this is a script instead of a conventional tag, right? If something in the script tag is messed up. I don't know why my font got so tiny there, right? If the script is messed up, then all the JavaScript on the page won't work. And let's do a quick demo on that. For example, if I do this, right, I do my old page one here. And let's change something in the tag. I'm going to make a malformed thing. So var y equals, right? And then close it out. So I'm not assigning it equal to anything. There's an invalid statement, right? I want to assign something, but there's nothing there. Let's see what happens. Right? So hopefully, you know, we'll see. It shouldn't work though. Yeah, see? So I made that one thing. None of the JavaScript works. Even though, you know, you can look at how the code is and you can say, wow, this bit shouldn't really affect anything. Well, in fact, what it does is because this is invalid, then the script tag itself becomes invalid. And when the script tag becomes invalid, it just kind of gives up, says this thing goes away, therefore, right, the system doesn't know what X is, therefore it doesn't know inner HTML equals X. None of this makes any sense. And so the browser just doesn't process it. Okay. So, okay. So that's it. So practical consequences, how you deal with this. Number one, you want to set up the framework of your code first, right? So things like functions, things like variables, set up the shells for the functions and set up the variable assignment statements before you begin filling everything in. Because if you do all the code in one big shot, yeah, I mean, if you're competent with JavaScript, you can, you know, probably do that. But when you're just starting out, mistakes here and there are pretty inevitable. So you want to make sure that the little bits that you're doing at a time are all functional. So add in a little bit, a statement or two, verify that it works, then proceed onward. Okay. Okay, good. We'll just make a little dent in JavaScript. So JavaScript 2, we're going to cover the basic elements of coding. Okay, events, variables, math, conditional statements, loops, objects, and arrays. So we'll start. Just do a few slides here. So JavaScript, as we said, geared towards providing various types of dynamic content, right? Basically lets things change on web pages. And this requires some predefined triggers. So you have a thing that you want to change, you got to set the condition that makes it change. It doesn't have to be a user action though. For example, it could be a timer. So certain types of what's called cross-site scripting, it's an attack that people can do. You can trigger those to happen, you know, within like a second of when the web page finishes loading, for example. But we are going to look at the very common trigger types to start with. So clicks or click and drag, swipes, and timers. Now, any HTML tag can have an ID attribute that allows scripting to reference it, right? So your basic syntax that we've seen before, so your tag type, whether it's a P for a paragraph or a button, whatever, can have this ID name, this ID attribute, and then you give it a name, there's your closing tag. So this is the one we saw before. We had a paragraph, it had the ID para, this is para 1, whatever. And an ID tag can be referenced by using the getElementById function. So syntax, getElementById for whatever the ID name is. So, and we've seen that before too. And here the specific one, para 1. So within the page, the getElementById function is just another name for whatever page element we're referencing. It's a handy way to do it. So we just say, you know, document.getElementById para 1, for example, and that will mean this paragraph tag. Now, suppose there's some page element para 1 that we're referencing. Okay, within the scope of the object, we can change its attributes directly. So once we have a reference to that page tag, then we can use our dot notation, you know, getElementById para 1 dot whatever one of its attributes we want to change. Okay, so for example, in our HTML we've seen before, if we want to change the text to @ sign, pound sign, $sign, right? Dot inner HTML on that element equals those three things. Now, typically you'll see document.getElementId to refer to an element in the entire document scope. In most cases, you're going to need to do that. So if you want to find an element somewhere on your HTML document, you got to start with document dot. If you just do getElementBy, it's not going to look inside the whole document. Okay. Now, clicks. Any HTML tag can include this onClick attribute that specifies the consequences of clicking it. So some things are very obviously clickable, right? Like a button. You'll know, you look at a button, there's a little boundary around it, right? There's a border, and that's going to define the click region. And it's pretty easy and intuitive to work with. For other things like paragraphs, it's not quite as clear. For example, paragraphs are going to allow clicks on the entire line, not just the text. We can do a quick demo of that. Let's change that. Okay, so here, instead of a button, I'm going to have this button be a paragraph tag. And I'll put in a BR here, a couple BRs for line breaks, okay, so that they're going to be some space in between them. So if I save this, go ahead and run it. Okay, here we have it as text. It's no longer a button. Now, obviously, oh, I think I still have the messed up code in there, huh? Let's see, get rid of this, get rid of you, get rid of you. Let's see, did I still leave? Yeah, I left Y in there. Okay, we'll save that. Now, we'll go back again here. See, now I can click that. We see that works. But I can also click all the way over here. So it's not just the text, it's the entire line. And these are like little details that you'll get used to as you do more of this stuff, right? But it's not intuitively obvious that the paragraph would be the entire line and not just, you know, the area of the text. And certainly you can't just look at it and see, oh, which exact pixels are going to work, right? So I go one down there, I go one lower, just a little lower doesn't work, but as I, yeah, click right up there, it's close enough. Anyway, a little hard to tell sometimes. That's why people like buttons instead of paragraphs. Okay, so there's that. We've done that. Again, other mouse events, most of the other mouse events are pretty self-explanatory. They're just there in the name. So on double click, for example, or on context menu, that one might be a little confusing. That's the right click, because usually what happens if you right click on something, you get a little menu, a little drop down menu that lets you see some stuff. Press and release, so on mouse down or on mouse up. Moving over a specific page element, so we have on mouse enter or on mouse leave. And moving over a page element or one of its children, one of the elements stacked on top of a component. So we have on mouse over or on mouse out. So there's a bunch of different mouse events. You can make things happen in different ways. Yeah. Okay. And again, list of them there on W3 Schools. You can grab the ones you need when you need them. Last thing I'll mention is swipes. So swipes you wouldn't think would be super difficult, but they are. They're actually really complicated to do. So typically they involve a combination of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And the basic process for that, you want to create a container structure to hold that sequential swipe data. Because the thing about a swipe is when one thing goes away, you have to have something else waiting in line to replace it, right? So number two, you got to read the coordinates of the swipe, right? Whether you're swiping left or right. So you figure out where you're starting from, where you end, and that's how you determine if you went left to right or right to left. Then you got to smoothly scroll the old content out and the new content in, right? If you just did a quick page flip, you just had the one thing appear, yeah, that would be a lot easier to code, but it wouldn't look as cool. But you can make that work. But if you want to have it truly swipe in so that part of the first image is there and part of the second image is there as the swipe is happening, yeah, you gotta, figure out fractions of that. Anyway, so I have some links if you're interested in that. If you want to build your own apps and have this cool swipey looking stuff, you can do that. But I'm not going to require people to do it for the class. But sure, if you want to learn this stuff, there it is. Okay, this seems like a good break point. It feels like a good break point. I'll do a last call for any questions. Any questions on any of this stuff? I mean, we covered a reasonable amount of ground, not everything, but we covered some good stuff. Let's see. Yes, I hear that I have a lot of similarities with other voices. The one I hear a lot is the dog from Family Guy. Yep. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, then that is all I have. Thank you for your attendance. It's been a hoot. We'll see you all next time. All right, I'll have this posted up shortly. Takes a little while to process. All the previous lectures, the links are posted up on Blackboard along with the lecture slides. So wherever the lecture slides are, that's where the links to YouTube are. All right, we'll see you all next week. I'll post up some stuff. Yeah.